Welcome everyone to the, am I too loud? Welcome everyone to the Bylaw Review Ad Hoc Steering Committee, Wednesday, June the 15th, 2022. I would like to start with the opening prayer. We are doing the Novena for the Sacred Heart this month, so we'll read today's prayer. Please join me in a sign of our faith. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. In you, O Lord, I seek refuge. Be a rock of refuge for me, a strong fortress to save me. You are indeed my rock and my fortress. For your name's sake, lead me and guide me. I will exult and rejoice in your steadfast love. Blessed be the Lord, for he has wondrously shown his steadfast love to me. Let your heart take comfort. All hope in you, the Lord. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. We had discussions yesterday, last little while, regarding parent councils and how it fits in not only to our policies and procedures, but into the order of business. So that's something that we wanted to make note of. My intention today was to finish Parliamentary Kapoor's recommendations. We don't have that many items left. Then we would start reviewing some of the changes that were marked in red and sent to you in the meeting package. So at that time, we can discuss, so either we can, depending on what trustees want to do, we can either discuss that issue prior, once we finish Parliamentary Kapoor's recommendations, or we can wait till we get into the order of business. I'll take guidance from what trustees want to do. Trustee DeRosa, see your hand up.
Thank you for recognize me. I think there's an echo in the technology. Can everybody hear me? I can't hear you, Mr. Chair.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I said I turned my mic off. It might have been interrupting you. So I'll turn it off and then you speak and see if it works.
So I would like to make a suggestion that we deal with that offside item as a first order of business. Like that, we can have and continue fruitful discussions and putting in knowing that we have dealt with it during the course of the rest of the meeting. So my suggestion is let's deal with it now and then carry on with the bylaw meeting.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Duarte.
Yeah, we have just 4 items here. Let's not jump around the place. Let's stay focused. Let's finish this 4 items and let's get to that. I don't think this is a bylaw review meeting. We have come this long. Let's just finish 4 items and let's go to that.
Trustee O'Brien, do you have a preference?
I would like to. I would agree with Trustee DeRosa. I'd like to get it out of the way. It's just because I think I'll be more focused on the other 4 items because I think there's more urgency to the parent council one. That's my opinion.
Okay, who else do we have? Do we have quorum? So there's 3 of us here, 4 with Trustee DeRosa.
I'm here.
Oh, we have Janet. Oh, we have, of course, we have Janet. Janet for 2, the value of 2 trustees. Trustee O'Hearn, what would you prefer to do?
So what are the 4 items remaining?
So what we have, the recommendations from Parliamentary Kapoor, which there isn't a lot left. I think there's 3 items basically, and then we have. Well, then the other issue is looking at. Then it would be the bulk of the meeting, which would be going over the red-lined items in our bylaws. So a lot of the discussion and changes we've had, recommendations from Parliamentary Kapoor, have been now transcribed onto that document. So we have our existing bylaws with all of these red boxes beside them with things that we need to decide on. That's going to take a fair bit of time. So in the course of that, we would naturally come across our format for the meetings, and then at that time we can discuss inserting and changing, or we could do that now, right? Make that decision now that we want to add. So for argument's sake, we want to add into our order of business items from committees, whether they be discussion items, information items. I guess we can make that determination. Or we also have talked previously that we need a discussion item that issues that trustees want to bring forward. So we can have that discussion now, as Trustee DeRosa suggested, before we look at those items from Parliamentary Kapoor. We could look at those items from Parliamentary Kapoor. That's put to bed. Let's have our discussion on the parent council before we get into, which is going to take several meetings to get to, maybe is the other suggestion.
Yeah, I like to meet in the middle, finish the 3 items, then talk about the council issue, and then go to the red lines if that takes another meeting. Put it in the middle.
Okay, because I think that's kind of my preference too. We really literally don't have a lot left with Parliamentarian Kapoor of his to do. So if everybody's agreeable to that, we'll address those 3 remaining items, and then we'll talk about the parent council. Then we'll get into the red line. So we need to approve the minutes of the May 24th, 2022 meeting. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Trustee Duarte and seconded by Trustee DeRosa. Is anybody opposed? Seeing nobody's opposed.
Mr. Chair, I have a correction. I didn't second anything.
Thought I heard your voice. Oh, was it you, Trustee O'Brien? Okay.
I will second it.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. Okay, is anybody opposed?
I will abstain, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Trustee Drosa abstain. Make that note. Okay. So the minutes carry. So let's go to page 6 of Parliamentary Kapoor's recommendations. We left off at electronic meetings. So the recommendation is that language be added to make explicit that trustees are responsible for their own connection to the meeting, that if a trustee is unable to participate in a debate or vote due to technical problems, that this shall not invalidate the result, including a specific time to permit the trustees to reconnect before the meeting proceeds. This is similar to a recommendation in paragraph 101F of the investigator's report. So the question is, if somebody gets bumped out of the meeting because of connection or for whatever reasons, how do we want to handle it? So I guess the extremes are, if you're not there when the vote is called, we just move forward, or we wait a specific amount of time. So we would then call a recess, let's say, for a certain period of time, and then allow or try to wait to see if that person could reconnect. Or if you have another suggestion, please bring it up. Trustee DeRosa?
Again, thank you, Mr. Chair, for the floor. I'm not sure what the ideal suggestion is, and it's not necessarily that I have one. I have the concern that, based on the experience we've observed over the last couple of years, the technology behind running an electronic meeting is far from being perfect, as we continue to experience, if I may observe, as we continue to experience with the sound, with other issues. I'll speak for myself in my own situation. I'm not generally in a position really to resolve the issue, the connection issues on that I may be experiencing, even though connecting has not been a problem with me. It's been other issues that have resulted, and most of the time, those issues are resolvable by the central location at the board. So, you know, for me to experience some form of technical issue and having my vote canceled or not considered, even if we give it some perceived reasonable parameters, it's too high of a risk for me to take. So I can't support this. I think the onus for resolving technical issues, no matter where they may be, rests with the technical staff running the meeting. I don't see it happening any other way. So that's my observation, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Patrick, you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah. So would your suggestion be that we have to wait a set period of time? You know, because we can't, you know, say, for example, you're traveling, you're in a country where there's issues with connections and you just can't get back in. So would it be an issue of we wait, you know, 2 minutes, 3 minutes?
Yeah, I think that's, if I may answer, Mr. Chair, I think I know where you're leading. May I offer an observation to that? I can't hear you.
Go ahead. Can you hear me?
Yeah. So the issue of traveling internationally, I think I've experienced over the last 4 years, I've experienced a number of times. I remember in particular the time when I was in Spain, right prior to COVID, when I got back right under the wire. That meeting for me, I attended that meeting facing considerable technical issues. But nonetheless, I attended at 3 o'clock in the morning local time. And if I recall, I attended that meeting because of the technology wasn't quite working. Ultimately, I ended up attending that meeting on Director Daly's phone. So I was able to cast votes. I was able to comment. And that was, I think it was the brilliance of Director Daly at the time who came up with that idea, and it worked out quite well. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that that occasion is, although it got resolved, I don't remember anybody else experiencing issues of that nature. So again, you know, if somebody is traveling internationally and there is an issue, and that's understandable, certainly there's a way to do it. And secondly, it's infrequent to the point of changing the whole way we operate on this issue. Again, my observations. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. No problem. Yeah, but the challenge we have is, in fairness, do we wait indefinitely for that person to reconnect? So here's the challenge. One meeting we wait 12 minutes for somebody to reconnect, and then we register their vote. The next meeting we wait 3, or we wait half an hour, whatever the case may be. What there's no fairness there. There's no equity. There's no expectation or understanding. You know, one of the challenges, so last time I traveled internationally, I can verify, I'll have to verify this with Bill, but I don't think we can log on to a server, through a server that's outside of Canada. So I had to hotspot through my phone to be able to connect, right?
Again,
so that was a bad example. I don't want to use the example of I shouldn't use the example of international. Just it was top of mind because it happened to me. But you know, the challenge that I'm seeing is, so we're trying to move the business forward. Somebody's having trouble connecting. So you know, we either have to say we can't register their vote because we can't hear from them, or we have to wait indefinitely, whether that be recess that or you know, we as a board need to make a decision on how we want to handle that and give some guidance to who's ever chairing the meeting.
So as we're speaking, Mr. Chair, there is a suggestion that may come up that may be worth considering, and that's the suggestion of delegating the vote to another representative, another trustee, where the trustee who is away, in fact, delegates to Trustee Murphy to cast his vote.
That brings proxy voting, and I think we can talk about that. Maybe I'll get Parliamentary Kapoor's input on that. So let me just go through the list, and then I've made a note to ask Parliamentary Kapoor about proxy voting. Trustee Duarte?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we had this conversation last meeting, and I think we settled at 4 minutes. If I'm not sure.
We ran out of time, and I have duration 3 minutes.
3 or 4 minutes, something like that. Yeah, I think we had this conversation already.
Yeah, we didn't get to a decision on it because we ran out of time.
I'm good with that 3 minutes. That
you're good through. Okay. Trustee Agnew?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So, you know, the comment that I wanted to make was sort of in reference to what you had said about, you know, the equity and how long do we wait? And, you know, I myself have been in a situation where, you know, I've unexpectedly been somewhere with a loved one and you know, and had to log in from there. And, you know, I've been on vacation where I may have had to miss a meeting. And I think that is just the nature of this role. We have a lot of meetings. We have, you know, a heavy schedule, and there's just going to be times where, you know, if we are traveling, if we are not able to access consistent and reliable technology, that's just going to be, unfortunately, it's just going to be, you know, a chance that we take. And if we're not able to be consistently and reliably in that meeting, I don't know that we can hold up the business of the board to wait for someone to connect and reconnect and connect and reconnect. And unfortunately, I think that's just I think that's just a cost benefit analysis that a trustee needs to make when they may find themselves in a situation where they're going to have to be accessing remotely with sketchy technology.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Parliamentary Kapoor and ask about proxy voting. So the suggestion that Trustee DeRosa made was, if you know you're going to be in an area where you have technological challenges connecting, as a safeguard, you can use a proxy system, proxy vote, have somebody proxy your vote for you. I thought it was against the Education Act to do that, but maybe Parliamentary Kapoor, you can give me your opinion.
Sure, Chair, and good evening, everybody. I do not recall seeing any authorization for proxy voting in the Education Act. Again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not giving you legal advice. I do not believe that it is allowed, and if the Education Act is silent, then we go to Robert's Rules, which does not allow proxy voting. It's consistent with the idea that the trustees are elected representatives, and I do not know of any other body, whether it be Queen's Park, the House, city councils, that allow proxy voting either. Again, I don't claim to know all 168 municipalities plus the school boards, but I don't think that it's allowed.
Okay, thank you. Trustee DeRosa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make another suggestion, is that I think the issue is important enough, the importance of voting, and if we're unsure, and this is not to question anyone's opinion here, but if we aren't sure about the opinion, I think we should seek out certification or assurance that this is allowed or not allowed under the Act. Okay, let's go get an opinion from somebody who knows the act.
Okay, so we're going to be sending all of this work for a lawyer's review. So I'll just put on here under my notes for lawyer's review proxy voting. And we can ask about that once we send out all the suggested changes we're making. Trustee Ahern, Chernato?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So to me, it's a two-pronged situation. One, we want to be able to ensure that all trustees can receive information to make informed decisions. And if there's technological issues, which I've had, I would immediately call another trustee and then they would put me on speaker. I think I did it with Trustee DeRosa, Trustee Murphy in the past when I've had some struggles. I don't know if that could be, I don't know if it needs to be in our bylaws, but, and pardon my expression, but looking for a buddy system. Hey, if you have a problem connecting, call somebody and you can be on their speakerphone so that, as Trustee Agnew spoke to, we also are committed to moving the business of the board forward. So where is that nice middle ground that we support trustees that are having technical difficulties, but we also don't stop it? So we should have some sort of a time limit. And I don't know how everyone feels, but like to say, okay, if I have trouble connecting, well, I'm going to call, you know, Trustee DeRosa and he's going to put me on the phone, that kind of thing, where it's an automatic, that's the next step. Thoughts?
Yeah, so I think what this recommendation is that we either leave things the way they are now, which is something that you've suggested, Trustee Ahern Chernato, is basically we find other ways of communicating to get our vote across, which we can do. There's nothing wrong with that. If we don't want to, because there are so many situations where that may be challenging, to try and create a more rigid structure is difficult, then we could just leave things the way they are. Or if we think, you know, not to put words into other people's mouths, but it almost comes down to, you know, the onus is on the trustee to make sure you're able to communicate and vote regardless of your circumstances. You have to try and mitigate those. And you don't have an absolute right to vote, right? Maybe I'm not explaining this correctly, and maybe Parliamentary Kapoor can jump in, but you have an opportunity to vote, but you don't necessarily have an absolute right to vote if you are not available or can't communicate. Is that a fair statement, Parliamentary Kapoor?
Yes, Chair, that is, and it is in line with the recommendation in the investigator's report as well, that I cited but did not quote for you that recommendation.
Okay. So, you know, so that, I think that's really what it comes down to is how you view that right or responsibility, about whether it's absolute or not, right? So if we do have strong opinion or interest of doing something different, we can talk about that and discuss it. If not, we can leave things the way they are and then just try and deal with each situation as we can, keeping in mind, again, as we said, is even though you're an elected official with the right to vote, but that right isn't absolute. It's not that the business of the board stops to make sure your vote is recorded. Trustee O'Brien, we haven't heard from you. Not to put you on the spot, but.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really like the recommendation put forward. A time limit. To tell you the truth, I haven't seen a situation where it's been unfair to any trustee that their vote has been neglected. I think Trustee Agnew did indicate we do have a responsibility to be able to connect ourselves. We're elected representatives. That's our duty to either be here or be here electronically. And I think if, as long as we're open to other means of communication by phone or texting to the chair or something, 3-minute recess or a 4-minute recess. I'm not sure what else would be more than fair to me, but I don't think it has to go past that. And I don't really think we've really been unjust to any trustees because of connectivity issues. That the onus is on them to either get it fixed or be here. So that's where I stand.
Thank you. So Parliamentary Kapoor, can I ask this question? So when we're talking about your recognized attendance at the meeting, so once roll has been taken, you are recognized as in the meeting, whether that's through virtually over virtual means, Teams, whether it's on the phone, whether it's in person. So your means of then registering your vote, if you're recognized as in attendance, is it acceptable to put your vote in the chat? Is it acceptable to email your vote to somebody else who's in attendance at the meeting, or to text your vote to somebody else who's in attendance at the meeting? For example, let's go to the extreme. Your mic's not working, your video is, you write a pose on a piece of paper and you hand it up. Is that recognized as an acceptable vote? And is that a given, or do we have to actually document what does it mean to be in attendance? What does it mean to cast the vote?
Well, currently, the bylaw 441 states that a trustee or student trustee who participates with electronic means is deemed to be present and is accounted as quorum and shall be entitled to vote. We do in 443 under secret ballot for the election of chair and vice chair, it does contemplate that the members who are participating electronically can cast their vote by a private telephone conversation or by email with the scrutineer. So you already have precedent for doing that. I think what you'd want to do is make sure, it would be better to be explicit. And what you would want to do is you want to have some way of ensuring that the person who is participating is actually the trustee. And so if the chat, if you know who it is on the chat and they put it in that way, that would seem to meet that requirement.
Yeah, but you would have to have, so for example, you'd have to say, turn your camera on at the beginning of the meeting. We verified that everybody is who they say they are. Then it's acceptable to vote in the chat.
As the backup, not as the primary way of voting, but as a backup if required. I understand that would be enough adequate in my understanding of how Teams and chat works.
So, but your recommendation is that we're more explicit in when we say cast your vote, we should be more explicit in what are acceptable methods of casting the vote?
Right, you're going a little bit beyond what is the tried and true traditions. And so if you accept a little, if you accept a centimeter, do you accept a meter? So I always like to have clear and explicit and difficult to misunderstand criteria here written down. So this is clearly acceptable, and this would clearly not be.
Okay.
Or did I just set myself up a challenge on how to write it that way?
Yeah, good luck. Good luck with that. Because you're really getting close to proxy voting. At some, there's going to be at some line, you would have to say that that is not an explicit or verifiable communication, right?
Right. It's the assurance that that is actually the trustee casting their vote one way or the other, rather than someone else doing it for the trustee.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. So we've had a fair discussion on it. We talked about some different ideas. So from what I gathered, there seems to be an appetite to have a time limit put on, to be explicit in the means and where qualifies as participation. And then through that, though, also since we're getting to the line of proxy voting, would be to get a legal opinion on if we are making these changes, then does it go as far as to allow proxy voting with some level of assurance that an attestation or whatever the case may be, that person has transferred the right to vote to the other trustee. So I think that's kind of how I see the discussion we had. If that makes sense, then we can ask for everybody's opinion or consensus on that. Trustee O'Hearn?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question, and it might be a little off topic, but do we know moving forward what the expectations will be, September, October, as far as meetings? Are they all going to be back in person? Will they be a hybrid of in-person, virtual? What are we thinking?
Well, that's interesting. We don't know what the Minister of Education's directive will be. I'm assuming that there would be greater allowance to people attending electronically. Before it was thought as an exception when you're traveling or what have you, but I think it may become a more viable option, just as everything seems to be that way. We don't know what way it'll go. I don't know, Director Daly, if you've had any discussions with the Minister of Ed that way.
Thank you, and through Mr. Chair. So the change to the regulation, electronic meetings and not physical, that ends at the end of this term. So it was extended to the end of this term of trustees. I would anticipate that it would revert back to the prior regulation. But that's just anticipating. So right now the change to the regulation is still in effect. I would hope that by September, everybody feels comfortable being back in the boardroom so we can open it up to the public, both physically and virtually. But this type of meeting that we currently have with our my understanding.
Thank you.
Provision to allow people to attend, right, at our 4.4.1. We do allow that, so somebody could make that choice. Trustee DeRosa?
COVID has changed many things. Some things are temporary. A lot of things are not temporary. We're not going back to what it used to be. That's my humble opinion. I think we have to remote meetings for boards are something that, in my humble opinion, are here to stay. And we have to, I think it is safe to provide for the fact that it is a facility that will be offered and will remain with us. So on the erring on the side of caution, I would provide for the ability to attend meetings remotely to stay with us for a long time.
It's in our bylaws, so there is that.
Right. So.
Okay. So, can I get opinions on the framework of what we would be looking at? Would be to put a time limit on people's ability to reconnect 3 minutes is what was talked about. So then I'm assuming it would be call a recess for 3 minutes. And then if the person hasn't reconnected, we call the votes. And then we would be putting more definition around methods of voting. So if that's what everybody is interested in moving forward, we can kind of vote consensus on. Trustee Duarte?
So Chair, I'm good with the 3 minutes, but not sure we need to call a recess. Once you call a recess, the 3 minutes, suppose the person connects quickly, we could request everybody to stand at ease. So everybody could be there and.
So Parliamentary Kapoor, what's the difference between calling a recess and standing at ease?
Standing at ease is a much easier process to reconvene the meeting. And you know what you could also do is if and this may sound familiar to you, Chair Murphy, if you call a vote and some member attending virtually doesn't answer, you could say, all right, we'll start the clock, but we'll take the votes of the other trustees and wait the 3 minutes to see if that trustee is reconnected and able to vote. But you could still, depending on the circumstance, get business done. You don't have to totally wait during those 3 minutes. But I agree with Chair Duarte, Board Chair Duarte, that stand at ease would probably be better than a recess.
So just to clarify, when you're standing at ease and a vote is called, but there can't be any other discussions going on, we're basically silent, just waiting.
Yes, but the other thing about stand at ease is that as soon as that trustee is able to reconnect, if it's a minute instead of the full 3, then you can get right back into things without having to wait a full 3 minutes.
Okay, makes sense. So 3 minutes, which would be stand at ease. Okay, so I can, Trustee DeRosa, you have your hand up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm opposed to time limit. I think reasonableness should prevail because there's all sorts of other things that could emanate from a hard time limit. I would be in support of. Now I'm getting a brain freeze. There's 2 aspects to this. There's a time limit, and then there was the second aspect of what we're trying to get consensus on, which was
cleaning up the ways you could vote. If you're having technical difficulties.
Okay, sorry. Thank you for jogging my memory. I think we should move towards as close as possible to proxy voting if that is possible. And if it's legal, then we should adapt it. But the time limit, I can't support. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We'll just go around and ask Trustee O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. A 3 minute stand at ease to me would be more than fair.
Okay. Trustee Agnew?
I'm fine with that.
Trustee O'Hearn-Chernotta?
Yes, I think a pause would do well, stand at ease, and then people can find other avenues to connect, as previously suggested. I'm good with that.
Okay. Trustee Duarte?
Yes, perfect.
Okay.
3 minutes. Stand at ease.
I don't think Trustee Guzzo has joined us yet. No. Okay, so then that's the way we can make that recommended change. So the next one is open question period. Why does 13.8 refer to petitions, inquiries, or communications if this section of the bylaw is about questions? There appears to be significant overlap with correspondence. So we can look at that 13.8. All questions, petitions, inquiries, or communications on any subject shall, upon presentation, be referred by the chair to the appropriate meeting without a motion unless otherwise determined by a majority of all members present. So this happens during question period. So basically, it would be a question comes in or inquiry, what have you, and then the chair decides or determines where it's to go, unless there's an objection by the majority in attendance. Is that correct?
If I may, Chair Murphy.
Please go ahead.
So open question period, I'm looking at the entirety of section 13 of the bylaws. And that is an item in your standard order of business. And 13.1 to 13.7 explain, as I understand it, questions are submitted in writing. The chair determines their validity. There's 10 minutes allowed on the agenda for open question period, and each questioner is allowed a maximum of 2 minutes. And then the chair either attempts to provide a response or directs the question to another trustee or the director. If no immediate response can be given, a response will be communicated to the questioner at the earliest possible date. And it states the chair can rule a question out of order and that employees of the board cannot use that period to express views relative to their employment or professional interests. So that all seems pretty clear and straightforward to me. And then so the question is asked and the question is answered, or so a response will be communicated later and copied to all trustees. 13.8, I don't understand what scenario it is meant to cover, because 13.1 to 7 seem to have it all wrapped up in a nice package. That's the question of what 13.8 does. I don't think I've ever seen 13.8 put into place, and that was why I questioned it.
Yeah, you can respond. Yeah.
So, Mr. Chair, I think this goes back, this has legacy value here. Before COVID, when everybody was here in the boardroom, we had a little piece of paper at the back of the boardroom with a pencil there. And anybody who attended meetings could take that pencil and paper and write their question and hand it to Rosie at that point in time before the meeting started. So and it worked quite well because we had attendees here who had a last minute question which they would like to ask. So this goes back way back before COVID. And so that's why it's there. Maybe we need to, it's a good thing if somebody comes in and wants to ask a question, but maybe we need to rephrase the wording on that particular bylaw item.
Okay, we'll go to the speakers list. Trustee DeRosa.
I'd like to echo Mr. Kapoor's statement on this. Everything seems to be in place. It seems to be working. The only change that really comes into play is the fact that in the post-COVID period, we really haven't provided for questions to be submitted to the board, or at least we haven't thought about, I don't think, about questions being submitted to the board at the beginning of the meeting electronically, because that's a reality of how we conduct our meetings. So if there's anything, I would add additional consideration to that and leave everything the way it is.
That's a good question. So, Rosie, during COVID, we would expect to get questions electronically. In the past, did we accept questions electronically, or did they have to be submitted at the meeting? Any recollection?
They have to be submitted before the meeting, and we have accepted via email.
Okay, so but it's really not in our bylaws or expressed in our correspondence. So that is a good point. We should maybe add that. Yeah, but I mean, if we're doing bylaw review, then we should really specify that it's acceptable for them to be sent in, and at what point do you stop accepting electronic?
So Chair, it used to be before the meeting started, right, Rosie?
Okay, it's before the meeting? Okay, so then we just would add it could be received electronically, I would guess, right? Trustee O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Trustee Duarte that it was a good practice and it still is a good practice. What I hear parliamentary report saying is that 13.8 may not even be necessary. Everything else is covered quite well, all the way from 13.7, and 13.8 could possibly be taken out. Is that what I'm hearing, Parliamentarian Kapoor?
With your permission, Chair?
Go ahead.
That is the underlying question. Does 13.8 serve a purpose that I am not aware of beyond what is already covered in 13.7, 1 to 13.7?
I guess the argument, or maybe the position that Trustee Duarte had taken, was that's the actual action part of it, that they can put it forward. Whereas I assume the other ones, it's almost assumed or implied, whatever method they're getting the question forward. Was that how you looked at it, Trustee Duarte?
Yes, I think we have what Parliamentary Kapoor is saying makes sense. I'm looking at it once again. We cover the steps required. Like somebody wants to submit a question, you submit it before the meeting. It goes to Rosie and then it gets collected there. So yeah, it's 13.8 is kind of redundant looking at it now, and I would think I would agree with Parliamentary Kapoor.
Okay, so then maybe under requirements, when we talk, the question shall be submitted in prior. We could put in there electronically, written or electronic.
13.2 says that.
Yeah.
Yeah, just update it.
So we just need to update 13.2 that it says by electronic means is fine. Okay, so then really what we're saying is we add under 13.2 a note that it's acceptable to have it emailed or electronically sent in prior. Then we can strike out, we can remove 13.8. Is that what everybody's saying? Trustee Ahern-Ternata?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I read that 13.8 completely different. I read it to mean in some potentials, the chair could refer the question to another meeting without having a motion. So let's say, I mean, inquiries and petitions, we could take that out because we're talking about questions. But if there was a question that's being asked at a meeting and it needs to be referred to SEAC, let's say, am I reading that completely wrong side of my brain? But it says, can be referred by the chair to the appropriate meeting without a motion, unless otherwise determined by majority. So to me, it's saying if there's a question that we can't answer tonight, we can refer it to another meeting without a motion, determined by majority of all of us. That's how I read it. So I don't think it should go, personally.
Parliamentary, can we get your response to that, or your?
That was why I put it in the form of a question, and Trustee Ahern-Ternata has now said that there is a purpose and that we can conceive of a way that this is relevant and could be useful. Then I guess then that's fine. Then you keep it. And maybe I don't know if anyone has any wording to clarify or make it clear. Improve 13.8, but if there is a purpose, and Trustee Ahern-Ternata seems to have just given us an idea of where it can be useful, then you can keep it.
Okay, Trustee DeRosa?
Mr. Chair, I think we're guessing as to whether there is a purpose behind 13.8. Trustee Ahern-Ternata happened to hit on an example which is very, very good, but I don't know whether there are other examples as well. I think this is worth keeping in the bylaws until pending the review of the lawyer and hearing what the lawyer has to say about 13.8.
Okay, trustee O'Brien?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I'm glad that trustee Arnson brought that now. We still can take out the words petitions, inquiries, or communications on any subject shall. Or you keep the shall. At least we could take out petitions, inquiries, or communications. They seem to be right off the subject.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Can somebody come to the board meeting with and present us with a petition?
That's dangerous. They can. If you go by this bylaw.
Well, sure. Let me ask a broader question. Is it, if somebody came to the board meeting with a petition, what would we do with it? That's
You'd have to
another way.
take it.
If you go by 13.8, it has to be entertained and the chair has to refer it to someone, which is not a very good precedent, if you ask me. Questions?
This is a democracy.
Yeah, I think we need to get that the legal opinion on what happens if you're presented with a petition. So I think in the Ed Act, it talks about open questions. I don't know if it specifically talks about petitions or other things, but I think we need to kind of figure that out. So put a question mark by it. Yep.
All I'm saying is that we take it out of this section. Only because it says, the name of the section is called open question period. And if we put those somewhere, I think what I'm hearing from some trustees is that those words don't belong here, petitions, inquiries, or communications. We can, could we at least take them out here?
No, I don't think so.
13.8, want to put it in somewhere else, but the subject of this section is called open question period.
Yeah, I think it comes down to, I would suggest it comes down to the Ed Act, and if it uses same language, which a lot of times our bylaws do, then we would have to keep it in. If it doesn't have that, then it would be open for debate. So I think I put a question by it and refer to legal, and just to get their opinion on it. So for now, we can leave it the way it is, and if everybody's okay with that, I would suggest we leave it the way it is. Get a legal opinion to see if we can remove petitions, inquiries, and communications.
That's the safe approach. I would agree with that.
Everybody okay with that? Okay, so everybody seems to be fine with that. Okay, so we'll move on to page 7. Which is bylaw amendment. So decision, what vote does the board require to amend the bylaws? 3 neighboring boards require a majority vote. 1 requires a 2/3 vote. Recommendation that the language explicitly prohibit amendments without notice. Yeah, this is a big topic. So, Parliamentary Kapoor, maybe we can start off with you and give us maybe some broader context. I know we've had this discussion and debate a few times at meetings.
Yes. So currently, I read your bylaws as requiring a majority vote to make an amendment. And there's different ways of doing it. As I've indicated, the majority of your 3 of the neighboring CDSBs have a majority of all trustees. 1 has a 2/3 vote. It's a common occurrence to see 2/3 vote as a requirement to amend bylaws, but it's not universal. And in this case, a majority vote, if all 9 vote, is a majority of the entire board, which is another way of doing it. So Currently, so if your status quo is that it's a majority vote.
Majority of those who voted?
Well, as we have, as has been determined by this board previously, and as just was decided by the bylaws review committee at an earlier meeting, it would be a majority of those who vote. That's your status quo. I just put it there. I know at least one trustee has taken issue with that ruling that's been made previously, and therefore I wanted to put it there explicitly to give the committee a chance to see if they wanted to change.
So two elements to that. One is to change it from our current practices and current interpretation of the bylaw, which is the majority of those who vote. The second element is, can it be done without notice, right? So are we going to prohibit amendments to bylaws without notice? So we can open up the floor. Trustee O'Brien.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Sitting through this process, I believe it's very well thought out. Our discussions have been extremely in-depth, wholesome. So I think there is some sort of understanding that our bylaws were founded on a very solid logic discussion. So I think a 2/3 would be needed to change them. That avoids an established process that we're going through to be changed easily. And if it really needs to be changed, I think you could find 2/3 vote in the future. And these are reviewed every 4 years anyway. So I like the idea of a 2/3 majority to change any bylaw, and I like the idea of a notice of motion. Keep in mind that I think the harder it is to change these bylaws, the more valid would be the change. That's my philosophy. Thank you.
One more element, Parliamentary Kapoor. Is there a time limit? Do any other boards have a time limit on bringing forward an amendment to the bylaws? So say, for example, you can't bring it forward again for 3 months. Do you know of anything like that?
I do not recall seeing that in the 4 neighboring school boards that I reviewed, and I don't recall seeing that in any others that I happen to come across. I did have one follow-up question on Trustee O'Brien's remarks. Does that 2/3 vote also apply to a review of the kind that you're doing right now?
Okay. Can I say that?
Sure, go ahead.
To me, I would say no to that. But I would think that, again, there is a legal vetting that this goes through. And so I think there's that extra safeguard there. But I'd be open to 2/3 as well. The only thing is, we have to do the review anyway. It's not like there's a choice.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I think a majority now would be fair, only because it has to be done anyway, and it does have to be done. Whereas to change what's in the process, I think it should be given a stronger, a higher level. Thank you.
Trustee DeRosa?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would support 2/3 for now and future. And the underlying reason is because of the importance and the permanence of our rules of engagement, which are the bylaws. They shouldn't be easy to change. They should have long-term standing. Agreed that they should be reviewed, but any changes currently or future should have 2/3.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Dorr?
Through Mr. Chair, just want to clarify here. We're talking about amending the bylaws, right? So we go as per governance policy, which says that any trustee who wants to change a bylaw has to do it through policy. So that's what we're talking about. Here, governance
Not,
policy says that very clearly here. Let me read that out.
so Parliamentary Kapoor, I think your intention or
Here.
this discussion wasn't relating to the governance policy where any change to the bylaw goes through policy first, then is brought to the board. This is, and I think I recall we had some discussions or some votes like this in the past few years that it was done at a meeting, a board meeting.
So it has to be in sync with the governance policy, because the governance policy here, second, fifth bullet, under requirements, first, second, third, fourth, fifth.
Oh, actually,
In accordance.
maybe we did do those, bring those to policy first.
Yeah, in accordance with section
Yeah.
14 of the board's bylaw, subsection 14.1, an individual trustee may give notice of an amendment to the bylaw. Such notice will be referred to policy committee. So it's very clear about how you change the
Okay,
bylaw here.
and but then does it say what the vote is at policy? It's just a simple majority?
No, that's what we need to figure out.
Yeah, so Parliamentary Kapoor, maybe you can get your opinion on this. So according to our governance policy, amendments to bylaws have to go through policy or be referred to policy, but then it doesn't state, I'm assuming at policy, because it seemed, I think everything we do at policy is just a simple majority, right?
So, yes, and just by the way, just to clarify a point, as this current bylaw review will be by a majority vote, because that's the current rules that you're working under. Your policy needs to be in alignment with your bylaw. And currently it is. Your bylaw 14.1 states that a trustee may give notice of an amendment, alteration, or addition to the bylaws. Such notice will be referred to the policy committee for study and report. So I don't see any difference between what's currently in your in the bullet that was just read and what's currently in your bylaws. I think in either case, it's the final vote that would require a 2/3. That is the vote to amend at the board. The policy committee would be a majority vote to make a recommendation to the board. So even if you change the threshold here in the bylaw, at policy committee, it would still be a majority.
So how is that going to work if it's going to be majority in policy? Oh, so policy
Because-
can pass it with a majority vote, but at the board,
Comes back to the board,
two-third vote,
has to be ratified at the board or approved at the board.
at two-third vote.
A 2/3. If we make that change, yes, it has to be 2/3. Right now, it's the majority. So that's what we're discussing. And then, yeah, So Parliamentary Kapoor, just to give an overview. So if I wanted to amend a bylaw, I would have to give notice of motion to do that, correct? And then at the next board meeting, it would be discussed and voted on whether that goes back to policy. Whatever the threshold is we decide on, it gets debated, talked about in policy, gets voted on. If there's a majority, it comes back to the board and then gets voted on to approve. So is that how the process would work?
I envisioned it slightly differently based on what you currently have, is that notice of motion would be given and it would automatically just go to the next policy committee once the notice was given at the board meeting.
So if notice is given at the board meeting, it's seconded, that is sufficient to refer it to policy?
Notice are not seconded. So
Oh, that's right, yeah. Not
Yeah,
anymore, yeah.
you could put in a provision that, so currently a member, a trustee can give notice, I believe at the board, but it could also be at policy committee directly currently. And it would be considered at policy committee first and then go to the board. What you're describing is a two-step process that notice would be given and the board would decide whether to refer it to policy committee or just defeat it.
Right.
The process, and then it would come back from policy committee, or whatever recommendation would come back from policy to the board. The way I was understanding it was that once notice was given at the board meeting, it would be automatically referred to policy committee before it came to the board at all. That's not necessarily, I mean, the way you described it is another way of doing it. It's just not the one I had in mind, building on what I see that's currently in 14.1.
Okay. So your way is now compliant with our bylaws and policies, or is it open to interpretation either way?
Well, I believe that my way is compliant. I've tried in the red line version. I've added a few words to try to make it more clear. I think the question that the committee would want to look at is all right, who can introduce an amendment? Any trustee? And what happens to that amendment, to that proposed amendment? Does it go first to policy committee, or does board look at it and say, we want to just defeat it right now without referring it to policy committee? And then can look at, the policy committee would report back to the board, and then the board has a chance to review the recommendation of policy committee. But what you're describing is an extra step than what I had envisioned, Chair Murphy, is that you were saying that it would come to the board and the board would decide on whether to refer to policy committee.
Yeah, so I think it comes down to, do we, as a group, believe that one trustee should have the, authority is not the right word, but could start that automatic review process, or does it have to be vetted by others? Yeah, I think it's the same. It's similar to any trustee could bring forward a policy to be reviewed at the policy meeting, right? It's the same idea. So yeah, no, as long as we have clarity which way we want to go, then that's fine with me. Trustee Ahern-Ternate?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So I have 2 points. My opinion, I think if any trustee should be able to present a notice of motion on changing a bylaw. So hypothetically, I want to change bylaw 13.8. I presented at the board meeting, but it should automatically go to policy. In the goodness of moving the business forward, let's move it to policy. And I think we should state it, if we go that way, in the bylaws, so there's not interpretation that if you present a notice of motion on a bylaw amendment, it automatically goes to policy. Right now, if we have policy as majority to pass, I don't know why we would need a 2/3 of the board table, because we're all invited to go to the policy meeting. So if it's going to be a majority of policy, it should be a majority at the board. Those are my 2 thoughts.
Let's Trustee O'Brien, then I'll come to you.
So, Mr. Chair, you can vastly jog my memory. You brought something not too recently about changing the times. It went to policy first. Are you trying to remember that?
I'm trying to remember that. I didn't think it did, but then I seem to recall we did have it. It did go to policy.
Okay, and then it went back to board.
And then it went back to
I
board.
like that. Trustees has a point. If there's a majority, policy, why would it be 2/3 of the board? I believe in consistency as well. I would like it to be 2/3 at policy. That's where I stand. Thank you.
Okay. Trustee Dewar?
Mr. Chair, okay, so once again, I'm reading the same bullet again, and it is exactly what Trustee Owen Chanoda is saying. In accordance with section 14 of the board's bylaws, subsection 14(1), an individual trustee may give a notice of amendment of the bylaw. Such notice will be referred to policy committee for study and report. So any trustee puts a notice of motion in the board, it automatically goes to policy for consideration. So I think it's very clear here in our governance policy. So I think that works.
Yeah, so that part we seem to have agreements on. So the issue then becomes, Trustee Guzzo just joined us. So the question, what we're talking about, Trustee Guzzo, is an amendment, a discussion to amend is at policy. Are there any times at policy that we require a 2/3 vote to bring something back to the board?
Yeah, yes, actually. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so actually, yes, because our terms of reference, we use the same procedure as board meetings do. If you recall, unless those terms of reference change and allow for something different, currently the way it would work is we would follow and require to have 2/3, and that's what we currently follow. And just to clarify, you did bring it to policy, Trustee Murphy, about the time change. We did well with it at policy first.
Just to confirm, at policy, to amend a bylaw requires a 2/3 vote?
Yes, because we follow the same rules as board meetings. That's our terms of reference. So so you have to go back to the point on the bylaw where it says each committee with the election of each chair will then establish its terms of reference. If the policy committee comes up with its own terms of reference, decides to go different than what we currently practice, which is the same terms of reference as the board meetings, then that wouldn't require it. Does that make sense?
Yep. So just to confirm then, Parliamentary Kapoor, in our bylaw to amend, in our bylaws to amend a bylaw, does it say 2/3 or does it say simple majority?
It is silent. However, earlier in the definition section, it says that unless otherwise specified, items require a majority vote.
Okay.
Some people, as I didn't explain clearly enough, some people assume that bylaws automatically require a 2/3, but that is not the case. And that's why the definition saying unless otherwise written, a majority vote carries, that is what would apply here.
Okay. So I think we need to focus our discussion on what is acceptable for what is it a majority or 2/3 to amend a bylaw. I think that's where we have to come to some agreements or consensus. Trustee DeRosa?
Mr. Chair, I think we have to clarify the ambiguity that Mr. Kapoor just indicated. I think it's clear that it's 2/3 at the board level.
He said it's silent.
Sorry?
He said that our bylaws are silent on that, and I think what he said in Robert's rules, generally, if you're silent, it's a simple majority. So that's the problem.
So that's exactly the point I'm making. I'm recommending that we clarify our bylaws to bring them in line to 2/3.
Yeah, that's what we're discussing. Do trustees want it to be a simple majority or 2/3? So that's what we're focusing our discussion on right now. And then I'll let some other people speak, and then we can go around and have a consensus vote. Trustee Guzzo?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I want 2/3 or if I want simple majority, to be honest with you. I think on one hand, the bylaws shouldn't be messed with easily, I don't believe, especially after the process that we're going through. And this process is required every 4 years. So I'm not sure. Like, can I think about it, Trustee Murphy?
Parliamentary Kapoor brought up an interesting discussion, I think, before you were on, is so then if we're saying 2/3 majority vote is required to amend the bylaws, what about when next time we do bylaw review, do we accept majority at that time, or does it have to be 2/3 during the next bylaw review cycle? Just some more
I would
food
think,
for thought.
I would see, for me, it would be consistent. It would be the same. If it's 2/3, it's 2/3, regardless if it's an individual trustee or if it's during the review. Just like when we go through readings, right, with new policies. It's something new and it's got a large impact potentially.
Yeah. Okay. Trustee Dewar?
So Chair, I'm more inclined to say 2/3. It's just because bylaws are something that that are sacred, and we should stick to them, and everybody should understand them. So changing them should not be very easy. I'm more inclined to 2/3.
Okay. Trustee O'Brien?
Thank you, through Mr. Chair. I agree with Trustee Guzzo that bylaws are a thing that should not be changed easily. I definitely agree with that. So to amend a single bylaw, because I think that's what I was referring to, I think a 2/3 would be definitely follow that rule. However, since the review is mandatory every 4 years, it does put a different, I don't think it's different. Let me say this. It has to be done. It's not like there's a choice of it being done. It's like, I wonder even if now, if we don't get a 2/3 after this tremendous review, what's the next step? Do we have another review? So I think for the 4-year review, a majority would suffice, keeping in mind that it has to go to legal as well. So you have that extra safeguard as well. But to change one bylaw, I think would take 2/3.
So let me get Parliamentary Kapoor's opinion on this. So to Trustee O'Brien's point, is there or should there be, or is it common to have a different standard for approval for a bylaw review, which is mandatory and is vetted by legal, versus a single bylaw amendment? And if we do want to do that, what would you recommend how we change their bylaws to reflect that?
Roberts does not differentiate the vote threshold between an individual amendment and a large-scale review or revision, as Roberts is the term Roberts uses. There's one other option, and I'm going to put it there. I hope I don't further muddy waters. One of the alternative that Robert gives versus the 2/3 is a majority of the entire membership. That would be 5 votes, given that there are 9 trustees. If all 9 vote, that's the same as a majority vote. But I'm just giving it to you in the sense of, for sake of completeness, if that somehow manages to be a consensus building, but I hate to further complicate this discussion. The short answer to Trustee O'Brien's question, to your question, is that Roberts does not contemplate a different vote threshold for review versus an individual amendment, but there's nothing to stop this board from putting that in place.
Trustee Guzzo?
So here's my thought, and correct me if I'm wrong. We're required to do reviews. We are doing a review. This may not pass, but that doesn't mean we didn't meet our obligations. We're still doing the review. So just like policies, we review them. We're required to review them. If changes don't pass, it doesn't mean we haven't reviewed them. Or
Right,
am I
yeah.
totally out to lunch?
Yeah, you're not required to update them. You're do the
Right?
review.
Like, yeah, you're required to do the review. So I think it needs to be consistent, which makes sense why Roberts wouldn't differentiate. So I agree. I think muddying the waters is
Okay.
having two different sets. So, but I actually don't mind the idea that Parliamentarian Kapoor actually just brought up, which is a majority of the entire.
Assembly. Okay, so it sounds like most trustees are leaning towards a 2/3 majority to amend the bylaws, and then we would keep that the same as the review. So I'll go trustee Ahern Trinata. You have the floor.
Thank you. I got in at the last minute. I just want to offer it up to any trustee that wants to answer this question. I'm ruminating about this, and 2/3 seems to be logical, right? It makes sense. We don't want to make it easy, but are there any negatives that we haven't discussed that could occur because we're turning it into a 2/3 of a vote? And I'll really open it up to anyone that might be able to help me with that. I'm just making sure there's no negatives to this decision if we go with the 2/3.
Do you want to comment on that, or trustee DeRosa?
I think given the importance of the bylaws, their permanence, and the fact that we don't really want to open ourselves up to, for the lack of a better word here, frivolous changes being required. I think 2/3 is a safety net, and I think that I don't see very many negatives to a 2/3 vote.
Okay, thank you, trustee O'Brien. Okay, so then I'll go around and ask if everybody is agreeable to the threshold being 2/3 to amend our bylaws, and then it would be the same as 2/3 to pass the during the mandatory review of our bylaws would be the same, would be 2/3. Trustee, I'll go with you, trustee Duarte.
2/3.
Trustee Duarte, trustee DeRosa,
I'm okay with 2/3.
trustee O'Brien.
One quick clarification question
Yep.
before I vote. So 2/3 as it stands now would be 6 people,
Yes.
correct?
Yeah.
Okay. I would say I agree with that in favor.
Yeah.
If
So,
if everyone votes.
So, yeah, it's 2/3 of the votes cast. Is that correct, Parliamentary Kapoor?
Yes, consistent with your previous this committee's previous decisions.
Director Daly?
And just to be clear, this is for the next time around.
Yes.
So this current bylaw review, which we're undergoing now and have been for quite a bit of time, it's a majority vote.
Right. Yeah.
Just so everybody's.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a good point. It's 2/3 of those who voted, right? For the next one, yeah. Yes. So trustee O'Brien, did you?
I favor of that 2/3
Okay.
consistent.
Trustee O'Brien, trustee Ahern Trinata?
Yeah, no, I'm not in favor of it. I think it should be
Okay.
majority.
Trustee,
Did you call me? Oh, sorry, I kicked it out. No, you know what? No to 2/3. I would
no.
prefer majority of the entire assembly.
trustee Agnew?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too would prefer the majority as opposed to 2/3.
Yeah, so we're divided. I don't know.
What is the count right now?
3-3. And honestly, I'm on the fence. I really am. I see the merits in both sides. I'm erring more on the side of majority just
Why don't,
to get the business of the board moving
why don't
forward.
we revisit it again? Leave it at that.
What's that? Yeah, I think so this is how I would like that. Since we don't have a clear decision, let's revisit it next meeting. Is that agreeable to everybody?
I can go with a majority that will help the decision. To me, it's not that much of an issue but to move it forward, I will say a majority.
Okay, because we keep in mind that once we make these suggested changes, it goes to the lawyer, then it comes back to us to be voted on, and then at that time there still could be changes. So, sorry, he's going to call you trustee. Sorry, I didn't mean to insult you, Director Davey. Go ahead.
Just so I'm clear, majority of all members,
Well,
or majority of members present, because I
Good.
think Trustee Guzzo was suggesting that she was in favor of Atul's suggestion, which was a majority of all the members. Maybe I heard that wrong.
I'm the
Yes.
same.
and trustee,
And Trustee Agnews is saying, okay.
and I would honestly, I would be the same too. If it is majority, it would have to be a majority of all members, not just those who voted. That's how I would. Trustee O'Brien, is that how you would? Yeah. Okay. So then really we're 5-5. Well, actually, sorry, you go over. Yeah, so then we do have a majority that would want that way. So the decision would be that it's the majority of the assembly to approve that. Okay, so we'll go on the last item. Actually, well, so the last item really is the housekeeping miscellaneous, which is looking at all the red highlights. So we'll talk about the item we added, which was what came out of CPIC and the impact it would have for us specifically with bylaws is that we would have to add to our order of business that a topic or a heading that would be something like recommendations from committees or something along those lines, right? So that's kind of where we'll start the discussion. Where do you want to, what do you want to put, where do you want to put it? How is it structured? And I think then we would realistically, in my opinion anyway, we would need a corresponding policy and procedure that ties that together. But again, that's what we can have this discussion. Trustee Agnew?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So something that was sort of suggested that we could potentially consider would be, and I've seen some boards do this, not specific to committee recommendations, but the way that they even handle delegations. And one thing we could think about would be providing an opportunity, perhaps not at every board meeting, because we know how busy the board meetings could be, but perhaps an opportunity, maybe once a month to have something on the agenda. And we would almost have that advisory committee come in with their recommendation, almost kind of like a delegation, if you will. And then upon receipt of that recommendation, then there can be a decision made. So is that going to be referred to staff? Is that going to be referred to policy? Is that going to be received as information? And we could define what some of those options could be, because if we think about that, like if it's CPIC or SEAC and they come forward and let's just say the recommendation, is to add an awareness day. So I think there's a couple different pieces there. Is if a recommendation is being made from an advisory committee or from a council, who's going to give, how is that going to get to the board, right? So how is that going to happen? Who's going to be the person to deliver that? So if it's coming from an advisory committee, it could be the chair, it could be a designate, whoever that might be. So somebody actually comes and brings the recommendation forward, they give it to the Board of Trustees, and then the Board of Trustees takes that and decides where to go with it from there. So that was something that could potentially look like that. And that could be a way that we could deal with this. We'd put that on in our bylaws on the agenda, and that could be a way for us to handle those recommendations. So something to think about.
So something like after delegations, we would have another heading, which would be recommendations from advisory committees.
Exactly. And because that's the piece, like, and we had the, you know, again, I was trying to think of in the years I've been on SEAC, I think we've only ever had one recommendation come forward. But again, how does that recommendation come forward? If you think of the logistics of it, which is one of the things we're trying to work out, is how does the actual recommendation come forward? So giving a mechanism for someone to come and present that recommendation, explain the recommendation, allow trustees to ask questions about it, because you need to have more information on it to make a decision. And then does it get referred back to the principal? I mean, is this a matter about pizza days or civvies days? I don't know. So is it referred back to the principal? Does it go to staff? Does it go to, you know, whatever? And I think we would have to determine where those avenues would be for that to happen. So that's another way that we could deal with it.
Yeah, and I think it would have to be, you know, we'd have to have obviously some caveats in there that has to be something that's under the purview of the board. Like it couldn't be civvy days, or it couldn't be.
Exactly. And in a situation like that, Trustee Murphy or Chair Murphy, it could be if it's something like that were to come forward, because we won't know necessarily what the recommendation is, right? So if that recommendation was to come forward, then there would be an opportunity for that to be referred back to the principal or referred back to the admin. So I think if we had, you know, those different options available to receive the information and forward it to the appropriate place, because again, we may not know what that recommendation is going to look like until it comes forward to us. So I think it could be a good way to do it.
Yeah, I kind of envision it the way that delegations are, right? So they would have to provide us with an outline, a one-page outline, then, you know, the chair and the vice director would have to decide if it's appropriate and decide whether it goes on the agenda or not. So I envision it pretty much the same as we do delegations right now, but
you would just need different areas, I think, for it to flow, Chair Murphy. So I think you would have where we have those 4 pieces. I do think you may have to be a little different in how that information is received and then referred.
Okay, good. Trustee DeRosa?
Actually, I'll reserve my comments until a little later.
Okay. Trustee Ahern-Ternanta?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I'm trying to hone in on the scope of this discussion. I'm having a hard time trying to figure out, and I know from where this is coming from the board meeting, but what is our overall scope on this discussion? Because if we're talking about communication from school councils to us, my opinion is that CPIC represents school councils. If so, there's an issue that can't be resolved, it should come from CPIC to the board. But am I in the right scope? Are we talking about every committee and association, let's say, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, I think the mechanics of how it goes through has to work through a policy and a procedure. This is basically putting a placeholder in our meeting that allows for those recommendations to be brought forward. And further, and to add to it, or maybe as a second layer of this, is there's many times where trustees wanted to have a discussion item at the board meeting to get other trustees' opinions, and we don't have a place for it, right? So the same kind of idea. So what I would, how it goes from the school council to the meeting would have to be worked out through a policy and a procedure. What we're really talking about is there doesn't seem to be an avenue right now or something that is under the Board of Trustees' purview that they have a recommendation to get in front of us in a formalized way, as opposed to just sending out an email, right? I think that's the intent.
So we're trying to find that placeholder on the agenda and what to call it to have these discussions at the board table?
Yeah, so I think it would be something like recommendations from advisory councils or something something along those lines, right?
Thanks.
Question, recommendations, information from advisory councils, I'm assuming would be something along those lines. Trustee O'Brien?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. And in response to what Trustee O'Hearn said, I'll read the regulation. It says 612, the board that established a school council shall consider each recommendation made to the board by the council and shall advise the council of the action taken in response to the recommendation. So that is what it says, and my sense is that we're responding to this regulation. So perhaps Trustee Chair Dwyer can tell me, is CPIC, is that their mandate to represent parent councils to the board? I didn't think it was, because it seems the regulation says the parent councils have the right to go right to the board with something they don't have to go through CPIC. That's what I'm reading here, but I could be wrong.
So I think this discussion was held at policy, I think yesterday, where it is, doesn't say that it should be an action item. It should be brought to the board, yes. And that's how it should be. That's what we are discussing right now. So one option was bring it as something like a delegation or something like that. Another option, which I'm just wondering, yeah.
It's the CPIC's mandate. The regulation says the school council. Bring something to.
Again, that needs to be defined. So
Exactly.
it should go through CPIC, I'm thinking. I'm new to this. Yeah.
I'm sorry. You're thinking it should go through CPIC to get here.
Yes, because I
Okay,
think
thank
CPIC
you.
is representing all those schools in the area. I think it's logical because any information flows down from CPIC to all the school councils. So
Okay.
the reverse should be true.
And three, Mr. Just a follow-up question. So my question is, my concern is that we follow the regulation and we're covered under the Education Act. If we did that through CPIC, would we be covered? Because I don't see CPIC mentioned in regulation, but I don't know the total mandate of CPIC either.
Yeah, it was, not to speculate, my guess is when the Ed Act was written, something like CPIC didn't exist. So I think the intent is the board has to be responsive to school councils. So school councils are mandated, they have to exist. The board has to be accepting and responsive to their voice. Again, not that we have to agree with it, not that we have to move into an action item, but there has to be a conduit. So maybe that conduit is CPIC. That for a broader interpretation, you could always look at that. But I think you take back and take your 3,000 foot view, we kind of have that, but we don't, right? We really don't have a clear direction and path that if a school council has an issue that is within the purview of the trustees, that they can be assured that their position is brought forward to us.
My question is, can that be through CPIC? That's what I'm asking. And I've
Yeah.
never been on a parent council except through a teacher. A lot of trustees here have. Would CPIC satisfy that? Would CPIC respond enough to bring it to the board? I throw it out to the trustees that no parent council is better than I do.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I think that is the second part of this, which really, so what we're saying is, do we put a placeholder in our business meeting, which is a board meeting, to allow that information to come forward? The mechanism of how, when, who, why, I think all has to be worked out, right? Because right now we don't have it. Right now it's you come as a delegation, or maybe in a report, it has to be kind of brought forward, right? So Trustee Duart wanted to respond to what you asked.
So two things here. First of all is if the school councils have a challenge, a question, and they go to CPIC, maybe CPIC may have a solution for them upfront. They does not need to come to the board. If CPIC cannot resolve their issues, then yes, it comes to the board. So I'm just thinking that. Second thing which I was thinking is we have information reports here, which we could change that and say verbal or written reports to the board that promote student success. All these groups that we have, committees that we have, promote student success. But maybe we should add something, because if we get an information report at the board rather than a motion, there's supporting information along with that motion where trustees can read, understand, and be prepared for the next meeting. Maybe we should update this thing, information report, and say it could contain a motion, a recommendation that comes to the next board meeting. In that way, we have all the background information along with the motion. Trustees can have a discussion here, and then it comes to the next board meeting as an action item. Just throwing it out there. That could be a conduct.
Yeah, we can look at it that way. I'll go back to the speakers list. Trustee O'Hearn, Trinata. We have 6 minutes left, just to let everybody know.
Sorry, I'll be quick. And just on the regulation, I just, again, it's interpretation, and I'm not an expert, but my opinion would be that it says that we make sure, because we want to hear from our school councils, of course. No one wants to gag them, but if it can't be resolved, they need a way to get to us. So whether it's through CPIC or not, it needs to find a process to get to us. And I think the regulation just really is reading, in my interpretation, that as long as we get the information to the board, then we're fulfilling that regulation.
Trustee Agnew.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to be quick. So I think the only thing that I would say is that, CPIC's role is not to, they don't control what happens at the school councils, right? They're there to advise, or they're to provide information. They can be a conduit for information. But I guess where I'm struggling a little bit is if you have a council who has an issue, and yes, you hope it gets resolved before that, but then it's coming to CPIC, and CPIC then is going to make the determination if it should come to the board. I don't know that that should be the role of CPIC. I think if council has something that they want to bring forward, I think there needs to be a direct way for them to bring that to the board, and then we have to have a mechanism with which to respond to that. I think, carving out a way for it to go through CPIC to get to us is, I think, just adding one more layer, and then again, putting a responsibility perhaps on CPIC that I don't know that they should own. That's just my thought. Again, they're not the governing body of the councils, right? They're there in an advisory capacity. So that would be my concern as far as having CPIC involved as a middleman.
Thank you. Trustee DeRosa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The way I'm starting to look at this is that we have a regulation to fulfill as a board. And specifically, the regulation refers to councils. Now, that may be as a result of maybe the regulation intends a governing body, whether that's called CPIC or something else, or whether the regulation, as it speaks in black and white, is dealing with the independent councils. With respect to the relationship with CPIC and the actual councils themselves, I think they have a little bit of work to do as to whether the councils want CPIC to be their the organization that speaks on their behalf on these issues. I don't know what the situation is and what the actual mandate of CPIC versus the councils is. But if they have to do a little bit of housekeeping in order to get this thing to work effectively, then my suggestion is that to go back to them and say, do you have to modify your role? Do you have to have consensus amongst the councils that you can take this on? How do you define this? They have a little bit of redefinition to do. I wholeheartedly support opening up a pipeline into recommendations from CPIC or from the councils directly in no uncertain terms. I'm concerned with having to fulfill the requirement under the law. How the mechanics between CPIC and the councils work out, I think it's for them to figure out. And we should go back to them, and they've asked for an answer. As we contemplate the answer and the response to CPIC, I think this issue should be addressed specifically. We as a board are committed to listening to you. Okay, the manner in which you bring that message to us is a matter of understanding between yourselves, CPIC, and the councils. It's for them to determine that. It's not for us.
Okay, thank you. Trustee O'Brien?
I'll just be quick. The regulation speaks to parent councils. I think the spot on the agenda should be for parent councils, and we should respond directly to them. That's all I want to say.
Okay. So yeah, I think there's a few things that have come in. So I think we need to have not only this specific issue of parent councils, but there's also issues that come from SEAC or from CPIC or from other advisory committees. Again, should be able to bring those issues to us. So that's, again, that'll expand this discussion. And then I think the other issue is we need a placeholder for discussion items that trustees want to bring forward to discuss around the table to get other trustees' input. So I think, you know, if you thought about it more of a committee of the whole type placeholder discussion area, you know, because we really don't have that now. So we're out of time. Thank you for your participation and your openness and willing to participate. So what I would ask, if you could spend some time over, because we won't have another meeting until September, if you could have spend some time over the summer looking through some of the changes that have been made. So when we do come back in September, because there's a lot to go through, it'll help us speed things up a little bit because we're running out of time. Trustee DeRosa?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one last thought before we leave this topic. It might be advisable for at least provide the response, which is the request that's been made. Some would say since November, others would say, you know, a little later than that. That's not really the issue, but we do have an obligation to respond to CPIC. And now with this conversation, I think we put a little bit more clarity and meat to the bone, but I would like to request that some form of a response be done through the chair before we close, we break.
I would agree. I think we should respond to every delegation, regardless of what happens. We should just summarize it saying, you know, it was referred or it was voted on or whatever the case may be. I think that would be a good practice to do. I don't think we need to have a vote to ask the chair to send that acknowledgement. I'm guessing. I don't know, maybe the chair has a different opinion or he could let us know.
Should not be a problem to send a message to them.
Yeah, just say this is what we're doing. We're discussing it at policy. We're discussing it at bylaw review, and it will. We will continue to do that. So
I will do that.
Okay, thank you. So we will adjourn. I'll do the closing prayer. It will start with a sign of our faith. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Awesome God, as we leave this meeting, we put our trust in you. We hope continually in you and praise you more and more. Be our guide in everything that we do and lead us to the rock that is higher than us. Help us to abide in your word and let it guide us in all that we do. We shall continue to look up to you because we know that you are our shepherd and we shall not lack anything. In Jesus' name, we believe and pray. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Take care.